Right. Oh. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We're just waiting a couple minutes for everyone to be able to sign on. So stay with us and we will be starting in just a few minutes. All right, let's kick this off. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for a webinar. I am Romy Newman from Fairygodboss, and this is...
Hello, I'm Tammy Bustin-DuPont from PH Creative, and we are excited to be with you today.
So there we are. Tammy, I love that you're drinking a glass of wine. I need to Photoshop one into my phone.
For sure.
So excited to be here with you today. Here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk to you about how to make sure the employer branding story you're telling is really inclusive and authentic. We're going to talk about the concept of candidate personas and how important it is to integrate into your messaging strategy. And we'll talk about how you make use of the right technologies to make sure that your candidate experience is compelling and special. So before we dive in case you are wondering what is a Fairygodboss, you are not the first. Fairygodboss is the largest career community for women. We're used by over 7 million female job seekers a year to find jobs at companies that care about hiring more women. And we help companies share your story and get in front of our highly engaged, ambitious, diverse audience.
Great. And so PH Creative, just to give you a little background on PH Creative, we consider ourselves the defenders of happiness. We're a boutique employer branding agency, and our real focus is on people first, and that's our vision. So our real goal in working with our clients is to inspire you to think differently, and that's why we think like effective employer branding is really important in that equation, because happy candidates means happy people in your teams, and ultimately it means happy customers. So we think that's super important as far as business today. So just to kind of kick off our discussion today, I'll lead through part of it, and then Romy's going to pick up and talk a little bit more about inclusive content and the inclusion of women in our storytelling. I thought it would be good just to kind of think about like how the world of recruiting overall has changed, and just to look back a little bit and kind of talk about where we are today. So when you think about like what's happening, what happened in the past, like the 90s, or what I call the old post and pray era, in that it was super reactive. Like the only things we had to rely on in those days were job boards. The newspaper was still in effect. A lot of companies and recruiters were using search firms to help them find individuals. And really the only way of talking about who you were as a company and what it was like to work there and some of the things that make you special was your website. So that's the era of the 2000s. We moved into the digital realm. This was sort of the introduction of what we call employer branding today. Job search was introduced through online search. Social networks came into play, as well as things like mobile. And then so like, where are we today? So when you think about today, like candidates are really like shopping for jobs today, much like you might shop for something on the web from a consumer perspective. So, all of the behaviors of looking for a job kind of mirror those consumer behaviors. So it's really important to personalize content to help you attract the right type of talent into the organization. And so that's really what a lot of folks are focusing on today, is building up talent pipelines and communities in which you are offering those individuals an experience. So whether it's like a lifestyle experience, or whether you're talking to them about who you are, like video content is one of the ways that we know is super effective. And so you see a lot of video content today. In addition to that, like this is sort of the introduction of artificial intelligence into the recruiting realm, and that certainly plays like a key role, and we'll see that evolve over time. So, you know, just a little background before we kind of jump into that. And then if we take a deeper level, like if we take it down one more level, like did you know that every 60 seconds on the internet, you've got like 1 million people logging into Facebook these days. You've got almost 4 million people who are doing search inquiries on Google, and so on and so forth. I mean, you can kind of take a look at the graph there, and I'm happy to share this with you guys if you're interested in digging into this a little bit more. But it's just an incredible consumption and delivery of content, like more than ever before, and it's exponentially expanding. So there's a lot of noise out there in the marketplace, and just to kind of take it even a deeper level, when you talk about noise, like look at this infographic that's produced by Blue Green Brands. And again, I'm happy to share this with you if you want to ping me after the webinar so you can study this a little bit closer. But it just shows you the magnitude of like the recruitment and marketing options available that are out there in the marketplace. So, where do you even start? So just to dive into it, like you really need to start with your employer brand. Your employer brand is the foundation, it's the backbone of who you are as an organization, your values, the proposition that should help solidify your employees and give you a sense of purpose overall as an organization. So, we like to think of it as happy employees equals happy talent equals some things that you'll get from an organizational perspective. And that kind of goes back to like our mission as a company. It's about like bringing in individuals who want to work in your environment and, helping to retain those individuals and having them become ambassadors in the company and sharing that message out to external talent so you can fill that. And obviously there's some great benefits from a corporate perspective around, engagement and reduced cost as well. So, it really all kind of starts with employees. So, just kind of digging into like employer branding, the traditional approach to employer branding was one where you would go out, you would do some research, you'd talk to some of your leaders, your employers, your employees, your competitors. You would come up with like a core positioning and then, develop out like some pillars or key themes that will help share who you are as a company and then message those out in the marketplace. But the reality of that is that often lacks adequate research that, is critical to key individuals within your company. And those are what we call personas. Those functional talent or those critical employees that you want to keep and retain and that are really key to your business. Also, your EVP and your employer brand, like they kind of get used synonymously, and that sometimes can be confusing within an organization, particularly for individuals who are outside of HR and don't understand like what you mean by employer brand or EVP. And also these don't address like your critical talent. So again, those personas. And then the pillars may be like really broad and they don't necessarily speak to all of your employees in the company. So, it's important to dive a bit deeper. In addition to that, like you may lack some of the messages that you need to get across to a specific group, like really hard to attract individuals that, you want to bring into the organization. So, at PH, we are kind of thinking, or what I call like a more modern approach to employer branding, or we call it the brand world framework. And it really all kind of starts with the brand essence. So, who you are as a company, what you stand for as an employer, and then marrying that up to your corporate mission and ambition and some of the values that you have as an organization. And it's really critical to do that to create like a seamless experience. So as you think about employer branding, it really, has to draw in those, the vision of the organization and your values. And then, as we dive deeper into this and kind of walk through this a little bit more, it's really about drawing out like your stories within the organization. And this is kind of the first opportunity we have to think about personas, and we call it persona bias, because it's really like, how do those critical groups within your organization or function, think about telling their own story within the company and pulling some of those stories together so that you can then use them externally as well to help you attract talent. So of course, you're still going to have your key pillars and themes of what make you, a unique employer, those unique selling points, that foundational makeup. But we like to take it like a level deeper as well to talk about the give and the get within the organization. So what do we mean by the give and the get? So, what employees are expected to give to join your organization, and then what they get in return. And then, really even taking that one step further from a persona standpoint to look out in regions or in different key markets to say, does that change slightly for that particular persona based on where they are in the world? So maybe language or behaviors or how they feel about your organization. So it's just a different way, maybe a little bit deeper thinking when it comes to employer branding, and then this idea of, personas. So when you think about like personas, what are personas? Personas really are about telling us more about a specific target audience, what motivates those individuals, and what drives those individuals to do their best work. So, again, whatever is right for you in your organization. Often I'll hear things like technology, right? Because many companies say they're technology companies these days. But it's like, how do we attract more women into our, let's say, software engineering roles or technology roles? And so if we deep dive into that for your specific organization and really develop out their persona, we understand exactly what will motivate and drive those individuals to do their best work within the company. So just kind of taking it a level deeper, the kinds of things you would want to think about looking at from a persona perspective are both outward motivators as well as inward motivators. So, some basics like, do you have the skill sets to thrive in this environment? Are the benefits worth the sacrifice? Is it worth the commitment to join the organization? And those are the kinds of things that you want to dig deeply into those specific personas. But then also, inwardly, can that individual really make a difference in the organization and an impact? And, how do you draw out those specific things about those personas? Do they fit in the culture? Do they want to fit in the culture? And do they, value, have the same values and beliefs as the company does? So those are all the things you would want to explore from a persona perspective. So another thing to think about when it comes to personas, they're really beneficial when it comes to attracting talent and also retaining talent, so externally and internally, because when you think about your people and having a common purpose that individuals within the organization can really buy into, it's proven to be, to help organizations achieve world-class performance and achievement when you have those individuals who bought into who you are as a company. And that's been proven over and over. In addition to that, mapping out personas will help you be able to resonate with your entire workforce, not just a generalized overview of who you are as a company, because you're really diving deep into the motivators of those particular individuals. And then the last point here is, look, if you listen to your employees, they're going to give you some amazing insights, some things that are authentic that you can really help layer into communication, and help you, bring those individuals together from an engagement standpoint, because you're showing that you care about what's important to them. But then externally, it can also help you attract the right talent as you go forward. So personas are like a great way to do all of those things. So today, I want to give you some takeaways as we think about, personas, and particularly when it comes to like attracting diverse talent within the organization, whether that's women or, other talent within the organization. How can you go about it? So we like to think of it, research in a couple of different ways. So, if you think it on the left-hand side, our real focus is at PH, when we work with an organization, is to dive deeply into that persona research. So we would do things like conduct workshops and focus groups. We would also do some face-to-face interviews, do some observations along the way, and also look at things like surveys. So we're getting, more quantitative data along the way. And then all of that research then would culminate into a persona lens and specific persona and talent profiles in which we could dive deeper into things like geography, or behaviors and stories that are important to those specific talent profiles. So if we kind of think through what that might look like, here are just like a few, like what I would call like tips and tricks and things to think about if you're thinking about perhaps doing some of this kind of persona research, maybe on your own, or you've clearly joined this webinar because we were covering some of these topics around employer branding and personas and diverse content. So just some things to think about. So really, it's about getting those motivators and influences to help you attract the right individuals into the organization. So when you think about like those ethnographic and psychological or psychographic data, you're looking at like all of the different attributes of an individual. It could be things like culture. It could be like their behaviors in certain situations, what they value most, in addition to all the things about skills and experience. So it's important to kind of dive into both sides of the equation, so that you're getting good input. And then also like look at all those different localized variables as well, right? Because, what works in America, let's say, may not work in India, or it may not work in, China. So we need to really think about like how those localized variables and differences play into how we communicate to individuals. So, you would just kind of think about like the priority personas in your organization. Of course, this is going to be super specific to your business. So, you may want to come forward to your business groups and say, we're thinking about doing a deep dive because we know we need to attract these type of individuals longer term in the organization, but really vet that with the business, because obviously you want to be aligned to the overall business strategy anyway. But really coming up with that priority list together makes a lot of sense. And then, don't forget to think about things like tenure within the organization and making sure you've got like a good sampling of individuals as you're doing your research, both that are new to the organization, maybe that have been there for a while, because the perspectives may be slightly different on, motivators and drivers. And then obviously we've talked about geography. And then, one other thing to think about there when you think about doing this maybe on your own is obviously you want to start with your internal employees, because they're a wealth of information. They're going to give you fantastic insights about like what motivates and drives them, and the type of content they consume and so forth. But you may want to think about doing a little bit of an external sampling of that as well, because it can help you validate like what might be important out in the marketplace, just even outside your organization, so you can factor all that in. And then moving on to who to recruit, like how do you go about like selecting individuals? I would call them like champions, like so those individuals who really exhibit in your organization you know, the ideal employee, so to speak, within these different persona groups. Like, those are a great place to start to help you kind of reflect on the type of talent that you would want to bring into the organization. And as you talk to them about participating in this research, maybe think about like even giving them a little bit of a homework assignment. So they come to the meeting and they're prepared to talk about, you know, what really motivates and drives them. And again, if you are interested, you know, I'm happy to share. If you want to ping me after the webinar, happy to talk a little bit more, you know, about some pointers there if you're thinking about doing some of this on your own. So then all of this kind of culminates down, this research can culminate down into, you know, those key persona profiles. So one of the things I like to think about here is that you may have some gaps in what you discovered might work overall for the company when it comes to your employer brand and those key like pillars versus what you're finding from your individual talent groups or personas. And so you have to kind of marry and weigh those gaps and how you want to address those to come up with the right communication themes that you take, you know, out with your employees as well as externally. And then from there, you can kind of develop your talent strategy. So these are just, you know, just some simple kind of tips and tricks. And again, I'm happy to have some further conversation, you know, with you as we go forward. So a couple more things. When it comes to your research, right, you know you're going to have some strengths, some things that are unique about you as an organization that you really want to put down as pillars of, you know, who you are as an employer. But you're also going to have some harsh realities in the company, right? And that, you know, some things that maybe are not nice, so nice about working within the environment. So this is just an example we had from some previous work we've done, and I won't spend a lot of time on it other than to say, like, you need to really think about how brave you are going to be as an organization in addressing those harsh realities, because they can either make or break you. And it's really about like not necessarily attracting as many people into the organization as you can, but about compelling the few individuals that you know are right for your culture and where you're headed as a company. So this is kind of where the give and the get comes into play. And so, for example, harsh realities. We worked with a client in which, you know, the fact of the matter, the harsh reality was there's no work-life balance, as an example, within the organization. And that came out loud and clear from all of the research. But what we did here on the other side of that is it doesn't matter, because people love working there anyway, and you get exposure to experts in your field. You can go deep and work on your passion, and you can have an amazing impact in the company. And so the company decided to be super brave when we went out into the marketplace to say, it's difficult in that we don't have a lot of work-life balance, but here is what you get in return. And you know, it was all about like working your passion, being the best in your field, being sought after, and so forth. And so I think you need to figure out what's right for you. And then I know Romy is going to spend some time kind of talking about like how to craft that content and message so that it resonates, and particularly with female audience as well. So, you know, just again, some kind of things to think about there, and that you're not trying to get like more resumes at the end of the day. You're trying to get the right individuals within your company. So, you know, just kind of reflecting quickly on what we've talked about. We talked about doing some deep research, you know, your leaders, your employees, going out in the marketplace, but also diving deep into those personas. So you have a good lens on the talent profiles that you know you need, not only today, but for the future. Developing all of that out into what we call a brand world framework, in which, you know, you're looking at your essence of who you are as an employer, but you're also looking at that through the lens of your personas, and then marrying that back up to your company mission and vision. And then you're ready to go out and start like thinking about how you want to communicate that in the marketplace. And so when you think about that, that overall, like what we call activation phase, it really starts from attraction through recruitment, and then as individuals come into the organization around engagement, retention, and then becoming advocates as well within the organization. So you really have to think about that entire journey and how you're going to communicate to individuals as they move from being a candidate to an employee, and then and through their development journey in your organization. So I have one quick example, and then I'm going to turn it over to Romy to talk a little bit more about, diving into the content piece and making it much more relevant. So one of the clients that we work with is called Continental, and some of you in the U.S. I know we've got folks joining us from around the world, but some of you in the U.S. may not be familiar with them. They're a German-based company that was established back in the late 1800s. And their focus is on digital automation in the automotive industry. Some folks refer to them as the tire company, right? Because if you think about it, as Continental Tires was how they started way back when, but they've obviously transformed from a digital perspective. So they really wanted to work with a partner in the US that could really help them dive into personas, particularly women in engineering within their organization, because it's critical skill set for them as they move forward as a company, and particularly in the US market. So they asked us to work and develop out some personas related to a variety of talent profiles, but in particular, software engineers and women within engineering. And so as we dove into the research, again, we kind of looked at like the ideal female software engineer within their organization. And, again, this goes back to some of those tips and tricks that I was sharing with you. We looked at what motivates those individuals, who influences and what influences them, the type of social media that in this case, Anya was interested in, the types of technology that Anya uses, the website she visits on a regular basis, what she likes to do from a lifestyle perspective, and then the types of content that she regularly participates in, and then really what drives her. So again, you can get some great insight about individuals when you dive deep into the persona work. Start with your employees, and then maybe do some external things. So one last thing I wanted to share here, and that is that all of that research kind of culminated down into a number of tactics that we helped Continental put in place to attract, particularly female engineers into the organization. So one that I just love, and I would encourage you, I've got the link here for you. I'm happy to share it with you afterwards as well if you miss it today. But I would just, I love this because it's a video that we did around Continental and women within the organization, and particularly families, and how being a female engineer at Continental affects the family, and how it also kind of helps, drives, and motivates the family. So this particular film is all about a little boy, and he has to go to school and do his show and tell. And they have, he's supposed to talk about what someone in his family does from a work perspective, and be able to do that and show and tell. And so what we ended up doing was using a real female engineer and her family. So this is, one of the engineer's sons who is on this film. And, it shows how mom and dad are struggling to keep the day-to-day going, and, both do their jobs, but how mom helped him put together his whole show and tell. So this is a really cool way of creating content that was relevant for Continental. So it talks about what they do as an organization, but doing it in a way in which, they're really sharing the family story. So again, would encourage you to take a look at that, because, it's quite moving, and it's a really interesting way to draw in the right kind of content. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Romy, unless we have any questions. We have some folks who are helping us monitor, but I don't think we have any questions so far.
Yeah, throughout the remainder, feel free to use the Q&A function to put in any questions you have, and we can get to them all. Great. So, Tammy, that was great. Thank you so much. I'm excited to talk to you about this idea of what is your employer value proposition specifically to attract the right female job seekers. So just starting with the state of the world and some bleak facts that I don't think everyone really internalizes, which is that at our current pace of progress, we are over 200 years away from achieving gender equality in the workplace. And one of the key reasons for that is what's called the pipeline problem that you see here. This is rather kind of well-known and well-regarded data from McKinsey & Company. What it shows is that at the entry levels of the workforce, men and women are relatively evenly represented. And yet, as employees progress through the hierarchy of a company, the proportions really shift and become much more male-dominated. This report says that if we keep progressing at this pace, the proportion of women in management roles will grow by just 1% over the course of the next decade. So for companies, which I'm thrilled to say more and more companies are really focused on driving gender equality, they're focused on having more women within their roles, within their walls, and they see that gender equality drives corporate performance. But in order to really fulfill those goals and aspirations to be more gender diverse, companies have to understand how to attract more women above the entry level, at the mid to senior levels. Why is that hard? Well, it's some of what Tammy was alluding to. So women don't always look for jobs the same way that men do, either on the same channels or with the same criteria. Women don't pursue opportunities as aggressively as men. I was talking to someone who recently did a focus group with male and female job seekers. And as part of the focus group, she actually observed that the men would go through LinkedIn and just hit apply to jobs they didn't even really care about. Whereas the women would give very slow and careful consideration before applying to any job. And then lastly, there are some industries or departments or roles that have historically been seen as less friendly to women. So we saw research recently that said 67% of job seekers have decided whether they'd accept a job before they even interview. So what that means is that what you're all doing as companies out on the web, the digital footprint that you create, the employer value proposition story you're telling is paramount. It is more important than it has ever been before. And what we find is that overwhelmingly, when job seekers are researching, what men are researching is, what will I make? Men want to know, the most important data point for them is, forget the job, how much will I make? Women want to know, how will I be treated? The core questions they have on their mind is, will I be treated fairly? Will there be role models at this company for me? And is this a company that's really invested in gender diversity? And they're not looking, by the way, for a company that has everything right. They see this pipeline problem too. They know that most companies are not 50-50 at the senior ranks. But what they want to know is, what are the values of this company? Is this a company that's investing in trying to become better? So with that in mind, we love referring to these Dove bottles because it's a metaphor for what we think companies should be thinking about. Just like Dove body wash is marketed differently for women versus men, so should your company's employer brand. How you're expressing to a potential employee what you're going to a female employee or to a female persona is different than to the male persona. So we believe it's all about bringing your role models to life. And that's this idea of persona and this notion that I'm sure many of you have heard the concept, if you can see it, you can be it. So figure out who you're trying to attract. If you're trying to attract senior level women, find the senior level women that are thriving at your company and tell their story. As in this example, a lot of things women want to know is, how do you find your experience? Do you feel like you're treated fairly? Do you feel like you're promoted fairly? How do you manage this job? And how do you manage this job and still manage a family? And someone asked, and a very good question, so are we stereotyping the bottles? Are we creating unconscious biases? So, and I think the answer goes back to, I think if you were an employer and you said, you know, when I talk to men, my company will be blue, and when I talk to women, my company will be pink, that would be true. But I think coming to your messaging with this notion that women job seekers are seeking data and information to understand how the current women of your company thrive, how they have success, that is, and you're answering those questions, that's what you really have to be thinking about. So I don't mean to be flip or suggest that you should just sort of like pink wash your employer brand, but I think you have to realize that female job seekers are evaluating your opportunity differently. And part of the reason for that is that on average, they've probably had a more difficult experience, or on average, we know they've seen things in the workplace that make them question what their experience may be.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next slide. Thank you.
Sorry, just trying. There we go.
So here are some examples of work that we have done with different companies to help address their needs and kind of tell the story of their personas. So with General Motors, this was kind of an interesting, it was almost a mashup. So they wanted veterans, but they also, as you can imagine, have very high employer brand awareness in their home market of Detroit. So they wanted to create a message that would compel female job seekers to be interested in relocating to Detroit. And so this was a story that we told for them about a woman who had, an Army veteran who had been living in Austin, was very happy in Austin, but accepted a job to go work at GM in Detroit. And she says in the article that the only thing she misses are the tacos. So really bringing to life, she loves the work, she loves the company, and she was happy to move to the city for this job. So telling her stories. In another example for Fidelity, we talked about how female financial advisors can find success as working moms and how they're able to balance personal milestones alongside professional ones. And then Salesforce, we told a story about a woman who created her dream job. So what we love to do is draw out the stories of the persona. And I think it's really essential that these stories be highly authentic and genuine. And when we create these stories and we disseminate them, it really does help job seekers either see a company in an entirely new light or see a company for the first time and be intrigued to consider applying, learning more and applying. So just to kind of close, when we think about attracting female talent, we find that female talent, it's not about getting job descriptions in front of them. It's about getting these stories in front of them. And so we help disseminate these stories both through our newsletter list, but also in places like Facebook and Instagram that we find the female persona engaging. We help send them more details, give them an opportunity to research and compare companies on our site, and then we want to convert them over to you all to apply for jobs. So do we have any other questions? No questions? I'll give you one last chance, and then we will say thank you for tuning in. And we'll send this out to you all. Loved it. Thank you, Jason. That's so nice. Great.
Great.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Oh, we just got one. Hold on. In an evolved or currently transforming industry like technology, how do you create an employer brand that doesn't scare away current employees, attracts talent that you're missing and is agile enough to change as the industry does. I mean, I'm sure, Tammy, you have a lot to say about that, but I'll just quickly say, I do think it's about being genuine. If it's, you don't want to misrepresent. You have to attract the exact right talent, but I think it's all about finding the people that you have within your walls that are the best example of what you want, and then telling their story.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just to add on to that, like, one of the things I talked about early on was, as you're doing research related to your employer brand and like, communicating who you are as a company, start from the inside and then go out, right? So it really does start with your employees and their, authentic perspective of, who you are as an employer. So in that instance, it shouldn't scare anybody because they're employees in the company, right? And then kind of using the strengths of who you are as a company in that communication message, but also then deciding like about the things that are maybe not so nice about you, what we called the harsh realities earlier, how you want to position those to help you attract the right kind of talent. Because in some cases, when it comes to attracting external talent, again, it's not necessarily about attracting more of them, more resumes, but attracting the right type of talent. So, it's really kind of creating that rallying cry for employees and then taking that message out externally. So I hope that helps answer.
We have another question from Miriam. What methods worked best to obtain feedbacks or stories from your employees? Do you have any thoughts on that, Tammy?
Yeah, so, I was sharing earlier that you can start to draw out stories, even when you're doing research, in that, you may ask individuals a little bit about the culture or about like, what it's like for them personally to work in the organization, what kind of things motivate them. And suddenly you'll get a storyline. And then from there, like it's a great idea just to spend time with that individual and talk to them about becoming like a brand ambassador within the company and really then fleshing out that story. So back to what Romy was saying earlier, it's all about being authentic and deciding, which stories within the organization from your employees really help you communicate like the right pillars and themes of who you are as a company. So do you want to add to that, Romy?
The only thing I will say is that, especially with diversity hiring, if you have employee resource groups, they are a great resource. And what I would even do is you could go to an employee resource group for women and say, what do you think our value proposition is for female employees? What would you want to say? And who are the best representatives to say it? Another question, do we think we should balancing it out, show content focused on women, but do the same point of view for men to show inclusiveness? So Eileen, yes, I would argue that 90% of the content that exists today focuses on men. So I think, and again, I don't think it's so much about who are we. I think it's about finding the people that resemble the people you want to attract and telling stories about them. And yes, that means men, and yes, that means women. I think the reality is, though, that right now for a lot of key and hard to hire for roles, the challenge resides in filling a pipeline with more female candidates. So you may have to you may have to pursue a supplemental and directed strategy for women in a way you don't for men. I mean, a classic kind of example of this is that we know that really most job descriptions are written in a way that resonates much more with men than with women. So how are you, if you can't rewrite all your job descriptions, which is really hard to do, how are you accommodating for that in the messaging that goes on top of them?
Yeah. And, Romy, this goes back to some of the research you were sharing with us earlier as well, about kind of the imbalance of men and women in the organization, and particularly the higher in the organization you go. So, I mean, it is important to address that. Obviously, if it's important for your organization, right, and where you are within the organization. So I think those were all of the questions that we have.
Thank you. We'll share this, and I'm open for questions. Please reach out to me directly. Would love to connect with you, and would love to have you subscribe to Fairygodboss and sign up for our newsletter.
Yep, great. And if you want any more tips or tricks, you can reach out to me as well. And you can also check out ph-creative.com. So thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Have a good one. Bye-bye.